Hello my friends, welcome back. It's Whiteboard Wednesday, and today we're going to be talking about adverse childhood experiences or trauma and how that impacts your mental health and your biological health. Okay, there's a lot of things going on here, so I'm going to go through this, okay? But first, let's start back here, okay? We have to understand that there is transgenerational trauma that can occur, right? We can carry from one generation to the next. So if your parent was an alcoholic, you can acquire those characteristics and possibly also just from being in an environment with other people who are drinking, right? You can adopt those behaviors and emotions and exhibit alcoholism. Okay, so that's a huge thing we can easily miss a lot of the time. Now, if we were to move downward, right, towards pathology, chronic disease can easily ensue from past trauma, and that includes some of these things over here, female reproductive disorders, which I'll get to in a second. But it includes also heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, asthma, bronchitis, and autoimmune disease especially, which in my experience, I see it all the time with my clients. All right, now, we gotta keep in mind also that traumatic events and their emotions can easily influence the immune system, right? They can have their own sort of gene signature and basically cause different shifts so that you can become more Th2 dominant. You can be suppressed in certain arms of the immune system, and this can create a pro-inflammatory state. It can cause leaky gut, dysbiosis, and that can, lead you down the road to an autoimmune disease, for example. Dysfunction of the neuroendocrine systems, right? The hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal, and gonadal axis can drive disease. Now, if there's trauma, we can see that that can also drive early menarche by virtue of the HPA and HPG dysfunction. So this is like the first menstrual cycle that a woman goes through. The studies show that around the age of 10 or 11 can put them at risk, and it's strongly correlated with eating disorders, depression and anxiety, fibroids, endometrial cancer, endometriosis, PCOS, diabetes, metabolic syndrome. So in one study, it shows that women who have a history of sexual assault are at an increased risk for arthritis and breast cancer. And even going through a divorce, right, as a child, can put you at risk for pancreatic cancer, esophageal cancer, lung cancer, and even cervical cancer. Now, it is important to keep in mind that going through divorce could easily shift your behavior so that you're using alcohol more or you're doing drugs, right? Things like that, which can easily influence your risk. So of the trauma, sexual abuse is correlated with early menarche. Now, what is actually going on? Why is it such a big deal? Well, the putative theory is that exposure to estrogen at an early age, in the absence or having deficiency of progesterone, can lead to DNA replication. It can cause mutations of endometrial cells, and it can put you at risk for malignant neoplasms or tumors, right? Whereas later menarcheal age might decrease the risk of endometrial cancer by decreasing a woman's overall lifetime number of ovulations, right? So there's actually an inverse correlation between late menarcheal age and endometrial cancer risk. However, we need to keep in mind that there is still xenoestrogens, BPA, plastic in the environment that could affect this, and certain genetic SNPs that might be involved in endometriosis. Now, let's change over to depression and anxiety in the context of early menarche. I think we all know that mental health disorders are a very, very heavy topic. A lot of people are struggling with anxiety and depression. However, I think we are doing ourselves and others a huge disservice if we are not taking into account and having a discussion about past trauma and early childhood stressors. The research on this is pretty incredible, right? Childhood abuse predicts depression and anxiety. Childhood emotional trauma is associated with anxiety symptoms. One study shows that childhood physical abuse predicted an increase in depression and anxiety and anger, and increased the likelihood of reporting more anxiety and depression nearly 40 years after the abuse took place. So what is going on here with depression and anxiety? Well, we spoke about how the HPA axis gets turned on, right? It gets dysregulated. The chronic stress is basically causing that negative feedback loop to not work. So cortisol remains elevated, right? Even in the absence of stressors and after the traumatic event has already happened. So you've moved on, but you really haven't, right? Your body is still perceiving that stress. So cortisol remains high in the body, and it affects the brain, resulting in neurobehavioral and neurochemical changes later in life. Yeah, and actually neuroimaging studies show that hippocampus and the amygdala are highly vulnerable to the effects of early life stress. So chronic stress and cortisol impair neuronal growth. Changes in these parts of the brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, have been shown and found in mental disorders, including depression and anxiety. Okay, moving on. So I decided to weave in body image issues, dieting, eating disorders, all these things that we see show up in the fitness industry all the time, because it can absolutely tie into disease and trauma, right? So if you go through a traumatic event, what happens? Well, one of the things is we have this sense of unmet emotions, not feeling loved, not feeling desirable, not feeling acknowledged. That can also tie into cognitive distortion, so irrational beliefs, unfounded truths that reinforce self-defeating behaviors and negative self-talk. That's like saying, I'm fat and ugly, no one's gonna go on a date with me. Or I can't lose weight and I suck at this, therefore I suck at everything else in life, right? And both of these things can converge to having this sense of low self-worth, low self-esteem, body image dissatisfaction. Now, before I move on here, we have self-defeating behaviors. And it's exactly what it sounds like: addiction, shopping, drugs, alcohol, binge eating, dieting, weight loss. All of these are examples of self-defeating, unconscious behaviors that are stemming from your trauma, right? Now, poor body image that can result from unmet emotions, and we talked about in cognitive distortions, we push you down this path of dieting and ED, and subsequently lead you with an autoimmune disease or PCOS or some other health problem. Right? Think about all the people that do competitions, right? They end up with severe dieting practices, they end up with potentially ED, and why do they get PCOS all of a sudden? It's a lot of stress, right? But why do they do it in the first place? Is it maybe because of this? That's all I'm saying. We even see in studies that people who do flexible dieting have preoccupation with body image and overexercise. Now, what's the bridge between dieting and eating disorders? MyFitnessPal. People who track their calories, according to the study, have a greater level of anxiety about their food intake and show eating disorder symptomatology. All right, so that's it. Hopefully that gave you some insight and awareness to this complex situation that's going on. And this is just my interpretation of it, based on the research and my experience with clients. So hopefully that made some sense, and maybe you can see that this is a lot deeper than we think. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time.